Chapter 2, History 101. Before we approach the evidence for Jesus' resurrection, let's become familiar with some of the principles historians employ to determine whether a particular account of history is credible. This brief overview will assist us when we assess the evidence for Jesus' resurrection. These principles are important because historical data, such as archaeological finds, documents, and eyewitnesses, are all we have to tell us of events that occurred and people who lived in antiquity. The principles we are about to look at are not hard rules of evidential proof. Rather, they guide the historian in assessing accounts of the past. A historian who is able to apply one or more of the following principles to a text can conclude with much greater confidence whether a certain event occurred. We will not cover all of the principles for evaluating facts that sometimes prove useful, but have only included those that normally come into play when evaluating evidence regarding the resurrection. These are the principles that will be used throughout this book. 5 historical principles speak to the resurrection. The importance of careful evaluation of sources is well known to police investigators. A detective is assigned to reopen the case of an automobile accident that occurred 5 years ago. She learns that the accident involved the collision of a blue car and a red car in an intersection. A group of 5 people waiting for a bus witnessed the accident. 3 left when their bus arrived. However, one of the 3 told 2 others who came up to the bus stop after the accident that the red car ran a red light. When the police came, both drivers as well as those at the bus stop were questioned. Number 1. Multiple independent sources support historical claims. When an event or saying is attested by more than one independent source, there is a strong indication of historicity. It is important to determine whether the source is really independent. Suppose a friend told you of a crime he had witnessed. You told someone else, who in turn told a third person. There would not be 3 independent sources for the accident, but 1. However, if your friend and his brother both witnessed the crime and both told you about it, you would have 2 independent sources. In our car accident illustration, one driver is hurt and is taken to the hospital. The other driver claims that the light was green for him and that the driver who has now been taken from the scene went through a red light. Those at the bus stop claim that the red car was going through a red light when it hit the blue car. If only the driver of the blue car makes this claim, it may be difficult to ascertain who is telling the truth, since there would be conflicting accounts. The existence of several independent sources at the bus stop who claim that they saw the red car can go through the red light increases the likelihood that the driver of the blue car is telling the truth. Let's add a twist to our story. The people at the bus stop give conflicting accounts of which car ran the red light. Although the conflicting testimonies confuse the situation, the detective has no reason to question whether the accident occurred. There is other data, such as the 2 damaged cars. Witnesses agree that the accident did occur. The uncertainty concerns who ran the red light. Also, the fact that the witnesses disagree indicates that they had not consulted one another in order to bring about agreement. Their independent testimonies provide multiple attestation to the fact of the accident. Number 2. Attestation by an enemy supports historical claims. A testimony affirming an event or saying is given by a source who does not sympathize with the person, message, or cause that profits from the account. We have an indication of authenticity. An enemy generally is not considered to be biased in favor of a certain person, message, or cause. Suppose one of the witnesses to the accident was a friend of the one driving the red car. This witness admitted that his friend was the one who ran the red light. The new detective weighs this testimony as somewhat stronger than the testimonies of the other eyewitnesses. A witness who would be considered somewhat unfriendly to the driver of the blue car attested to his innocence. John Adams, the 2nd President of the United States, was known for his high standards of integrity, although this did not prevent his political enemies from attacking him. Alexander Hamilton was one such enemy. In a scathing 54-page pamphlet published to hurt Adams in a forthcoming election, Hamilton accused him of having great intrinsic defects of character, disgusting egotism, eccentric tendencies, bitter animosity, and an ungovernable temper. Yet Hamilton made no charges of corruption, and he acknowledged Adams' patriotism and integrity. If Adams' mother or wife had spoken of this integrity, we might have reason to believe them. Yet, with reservation, when even his enemies acknowledge his integrity, the matter is pretty well established. Number 3. Embarrassing admissions support historical claims. An indicator that an event or saying is authentic occurs when the source would not be expected to create the story, because it embarrasses its cause and weakens its position in arguments with opponents. The police officer asks both drivers if they had previously disobeyed a traffic signal. The driver of the red car says no. The driver of the blue car admits that he caused an accident 10 years ago because he ran a red light. The detective may tend to believe the entire testimony of the driver of the blue car over that of the red car driver because he willingly shared information, although it would tend to embarrass or hurt him. He appears to be attempting to tell the truth. Law professor Anna Gordon Reed wrote articles arguing that Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, fathered children by his slave Sally Hemings. Before DNA results proved her correct, one of the arguments she employed in support of her position related to the principle of embarrassment. A declaration from a close Jefferson relative recorded the observation that it was obvious that Jefferson's blood ran in the veins of Sally Hemings' children and that one child could be mistaken for Jefferson. She argued that this testimony must be regarded as strong evidence indeed. Declarations against interest are regarded as having a high degree of credibility because of the presumption that people do not make up lies in order to hurt themselves. They lie to help themselves, she wrote. In other words, this statement by Jefferson's relative damaged the reputation of Jefferson and his family. Given the social prejudices of the time when it was made, a relative would not likely have invented a statement that would hurt himself. Therefore, this statement weighs in favor of the argument that Sally Hemings bore children for Jefferson. Number 4. Eyewitness testimony supports historical claims. Eyewitness testimony is usually stronger than a second-hand account. 2 eyewitnesses remained at the bus stop when police arrived. Their report would carry more weight than that of the 3 who only heard a second-hand account after they arrived on the scene. If all of the witnesses at the bus stop had left before police arrived, the second-hand reporters would provide support for the story that the red car went through the red light. They had been told this by eyewitnesses. Their testimony might be ineligible hearsay in a court of law, but a police investigator could take it into account. Historians must consider testimony of second-hand witnesses as they attempt to arrive at a conclusion regarding what happened. Number 5. Early testimony supports historical claims. The closer time between the event and testimony about it, the more reliable the witness, since there is less time for exaggeration and even legend to creep into the account. Within 2 years of the accident, battles between insurance companies pushed the matter to court. At the trial, several eyewitnesses to the accident testified to what they saw. This eyewitness testimony, and it is also early. Now suppose that 30 years after the accident, some fact surfaces to suggest that the driver of the red car had deliberately staged the automobile accident in an attempt to kill the driver of the blue car. The detective on the case obtained statements from living eyewitnesses. He has eyewitness testimony, but it is not early. Obviously, the ideal is to have first-hand accounts that were recorded soon after the events being studied. Since the historian does not have a certified written record of what occurred in antiquity, these principles are common sense guides for evaluating the written record of something that is alleged to have happened. A balanced scale of judgment is mentally installed into the brain of the historian who combs through the evidence. When she sees something in favor of the authenticity of the event, the principles run through her mind. Do any apply? If so, a weight goes into the dish on one side of the balance. The bar tips to that side, but another piece of evidence weighs against the event. A weight goes into the other dish. With some events in antiquity, the scale may be pretty evenly balanced. In that case, no decision can be made. In determining the truth of another alleged event, the scale tips very definitely one or the other way. When the scale tips significantly in favor of an event, there is reason to believe it is historical, that is, it really happened. In the real life of historical study, there is no magical truth-sensing scale, and one historian's evaluation often differs from another's. Still, our process of evaluation does take place. We will be sifting the data for and against Jesus' resurrection being an actual event of history. Some testimony is stronger than others. Historians employ a number of common sense principles in assessing the strength of the testimony. Here are 5 of those principles. Number 1. Testimony attested to by multiple independent witnesses is usually considered stronger than the testimony of one witness. Number 2. Affirmation by a neutral or hostile source is usually considered stronger than affirmation from a friendly source, since bias in favor of the person or position is absent. Number 3. People usually don't make up details regarding a story that would tend to weaken their position. Number 4. Eyewitness testimony is usually considered stronger than testimony heard from a second or third-hand source. Number 5. An early testimony from very close to the event in question is usually considered more reliable than one received years after the event. Part 2. Just the facts, ma'am. Introduction to Part 2. The Minimal Facts Approach. Comedian Emo Phillips describes a discussion between two men on a bridge. One is ready to jump, and the other is trying to talk him out of it. I said, "Are you a Christian, or are you a Jew, or a Hindu, or what?" He said, "A Christian." I said, "Small world, me too. Protestant or Catholic, or Greek Orthodox?" He said, "Protestant." I said, "Me too." "What franchise?" He said, "Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist?" He said, "Northern Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Great Lakes region, or Northern Conservative Fundamentals Baptism, Eastern region?" He said, "Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Great Lakes region." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Great Lakes Region Council of 1879, or Northern Conservative Fundamentalist in Baptism, Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. He said, "Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Great Lakes Region Council of 1912. I screamed, "Die, heretic," and pushed him over. The minimal facts approach seeks evidence with a high degree of certainty. On the one hand, are we presenting too large of a package of doctrines and practices for non-believers to accept in order to become a Christian? Are we sharing the gospel and how they must be baptized by immersion, how they must speak in tongues, how they must read only a certain version of the Bible, how they must look for the pre-tribulation return of Christ, how they must believe that the earth is only 6,000 years old, how they must accept the five points of Calvinism, how they must pay a tithe to the local church? On the other hand, isn't the gospel a crucial subject? In our conclusion to this volume, we will discuss the shape of the gospel in some detail. For now, we will define it as the good news of the deity, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Jesus is God. Jesus died for me, and Jesus is alive. When presenting the evidence for the resurrection, let's stick to the topic of Jesus' resurrection. This means that we do not digress into a side discussion on the reliability of the Bible. While we hold that the Bible is trustworthy and inspired, we cannot expect the skeptical non-believer with whom we are dialoguing to embrace these views. So in order to avoid a discussion that may divert us off of our most important topic, we would like to suggest that we adopt a minimal facts approach. This approach considers only those data that are so strongly attested historically that they are granted by nearly every scholar who studies the subject, even the rather skeptical ones. This definition of minimal facts will play a large part in the method used in chapters that follow. Most facts we use meet two criteria. They are well evidenced and nearly every scholar accepts them. We present our case using the lowest common denominator of agreed upon facts. This keeps attention on the central issue, instead of sidetracking into matters that are irrelevant. This way we can present a strong argument that is both supportable and compelling. One of the strengths of this approach is that it avoids debate over the inspiration of the Bible. Too often the objection raised frequently against the resurrection is, well, the Bible has errors, so we can't believe Jesus rose. We can quickly push this point to the side. I am not arguing at this time for the inspiration of the Bible or even its general trustworthiness. Believer and skeptical alike accept the facts that I'm using because they are strongly supported. These facts must be addressed. Once, while I, Lacona, was speaking on the evidence for Jesus' resurrection to a group of medical students at the University of Virginia, an atheist stood up to say that he couldn't believe Jesus rose from the dead because the Bible contains contradictions. He then proceeded to read from a book written by another atheist that cited one such alleged contradiction. I answered that volumes of books have been written to answer such charges about the Bible. However, even if this man read those books and rejected the answers they give, that would not matter at all in proving that Jesus did not rise from the dead. I had presented historical facts that are strongly attested by the majority of scholars, including skeptics. Historians recognize that most writings of antiquity contain factual errors and propaganda. They still can identify kernels of historical truth in those sources. If they eliminated a source completely because of bias or error, they would know next to nothing about the past. Thus, if this student continued to reject the inspiration of the Bible, there was still a collection of historical facts that remained to be answered. In that discussion, I could have changed the subject to a defense of the Bible. I could have attempted to answer the specific contradiction alleged in the book that had been quoted. Something might have been accomplished in such an exchange, for the trustworthiness of the Bible was important. However, students at the meeting would not have had to face the more essential topic, the fact of Jesus' resurrection. The side issues about alleged contradictions could have gone on endlessly. But we are not told in the Bible that one must believe in its inspiration or inerrancy in order to have eternal life. We are told that belief in Jesus' resurrection is essential in order to have eternal life. When we talk to unbelievers, therefore, we should keep to the subject that matters most. In the words of consultant Stephen Covey, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Since we can establish that Jesus rose from the dead without appealing to the reliability or inspiration of the Bible, we will keep these topics as separate issues. The point is not that we must avoid using the New Testament when considering Jesus' resurrection. Rather, we simply must approach the New Testament as we would any other book in antiquity. For example, Tacitus is considered the greatest Roman historian. Scholars recognize that Tacitus sometimes writes with a heavy bias, but they are still able to benefit greatly from his work. They weed through the bias and use historical study techniques to yield much that can be known with a great deal of historical certainty. The New Testament is a compilation of writings from various authors that the early church considered authoritative. Scholars debate the dating and authorship of several books. However, this will not concern us in discussing the resurrection. In our minimal facts approach, we only consider content that is strongly evidenced and considered historical by virtually all who study the subject. Although critical scholars frequently question the authorship and date of the Gospels and Acts, most of them accept that these writings contain a fair amount of teachings that can be traced to the disciples and Jesus. This is not to imply that we accept what the skeptical scholars say. It just means that we will leave debates about the Bible's authority to others. We will instead take advantage of the fact that most scholars, even skeptical ones, grant that some things are true in the Bible. When they do agree, the point they accept must be pretty well established by available historical data. Further, if most skeptics are willing to reject a natural theory, even though that theory supports their opposition to Jesus' resurrection, it must be that the theory cannot support by any evidence. No fact or theory finds total agreement or disagreement. Skeptical scholars are notorious for disagreeing with one another. Extreme, radical positions can always be found, though these remain in the minority. Some skeptics of Jesus' resurrection persist in arguing for a far-fetched opposing theory, although there may be little or no support for it. If we look hard enough, we will find people who deny that we exist. Thus, our minimal facts include what nearly all scholars hold, including skeptical ones. Seldom can we speak about what all agree on, for seldom they do all agree. In a minimal facts approach, we also should focus our efforts on presenting evidence for Jesus' resurrection, rather than on the inadequacies of opposing theories. This communicates that there is too much good evidence to consider and address for us to waste time picking on opponents. It avoids giving the appearance that one must run to the defensive. After focusing on the evidence for a while, it may be time to address various opposing theories if an unbeliever raises them. Minimal facts approach. The minimal facts approach considers only data that meet two criteria. 1. The data are strongly advised. 2. The data are granted by virtually all scholars on the subject, even the skeptical ones. A skeptic ought not be allowed to merely cite apparent contradictions in the Bible and say that the resurrection has been disproved. The minimal facts approach builds a case using facts with a high degree of certainty, facts that any skeptic probably accepts. These facts need to be addressed. If a skeptic takes position that even the majority of skeptical scholars reject, we can argue individually for the minimal facts that we are using. So if a skeptic prefers to take another position, that's okay. In doing so, the believer now has an opportunity to present much more data in support of the argument for Jesus' resurrection. The skeptic will need to respond.